The phone call that changed my life came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in April. I was knee-deep in paperwork at my engineering firm when my lawyer's name flashed across my screen. "Graham Turner," he said when I answered. "You might want to sit down for this. Uncle Harlan was dead." I hadn't seen him since I was 12, when he'd taken me fishing at his remote property in Montana. He was my mother's eccentric older brother who'd made a fortune in tech before retreating to the wilderness to become what my mother called a dignified hermit. Now, 20 years later, he'd left me everything specifically, his entire 800-acre property just outside Whitefish, Montana. "That's substantial," I managed. "There's more," my lawyer continued. "The property has some complications. Those complications would turn my life upside down." I took a leave of absence from work and flew from Chicago to Montana the following week. My rental car climbed steadily through the mountains as I followed the GPS to what was now apparently my property. The scenery was breathtaking dense pine forests, snow-capped peaks in the distance, and spring wildflowers dotting the meadows. I could see why Uncle Harlan had chosen this place. As I turned onto a private road, I noticed a large sign, "Pine Ridge Estates Private Community." Beneath it, in smaller letters, "HOA managed property rules strictly enforced." That was odd. Uncle Harlan hated rules and regulations. I continued driving, following the winding road past a series of large, upscale homes, each with manicured lawns and similar rustic, modern architecture. After about a mile, the homes ended, and the road continued into dense forest before opening into a clearing with a single cabin, Uncle Harlan's place. It was exactly as I remembered it, a substantial log cabin with a wrap-around porch and a view of the mountains that would make real estate developers weep. A small attached greenhouse glinted in the afternoon sun. I parked and stepped out, taking in the scent of pine and the absolute silence that only comes from true distance from civilization. Inside, the cabin was dusty but well kept. Uncle Harlan's belongings were exactly as he'd left them. Books on engineering, astronomy, and wilderness survival lined the walls. His old desktop computer sat on a heavy oak desk near the windows. I ran my finger along the spines of the books, feeling a connection to the uncle I barely knew. I was examining a framed photo of a much younger Uncle Harlan with my mother when a sharp knock at the door startled me. A middle-aged woman with an immaculate blonde bob and a pastel cardigan stood on the porch, a clipboard clutched to her chest. "You must be Harlan's nephew," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm Patricia Winters, president of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association." I extended my hand. "Graham Turner, nice to meet you." She ignored my hand, instead peering around me into the cabin. "We were sorry to hear about Harlan's passing. Such a shame, though I can't say he was ever the most cooperative neighbor." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "I appreciate the condolences. I'm just getting settled and trying to figure things out." Patricia's smile tightened. "Well, there are several matters we need to discuss. Your uncle was, unfortunately, delinquent on his HOA dues for the past 3 quarters. The total with late fees comes to $3,247.89. We'll need that settled immediately, of course." I blinked. "I'm sorry, but I didn't realize this cabin was part of an HOA." Patricia laughed, a sharp sound like glass breaking. "Of course it is. Pine Ridge Estates is a premium planned community. All properties are subject to our covenants, conditions, and restrictions." "I see," I said, though I didn't. "I'll need to review the paperwork with my lawyer before making any payments." Patricia's face hardened. "Your uncle was quite difficult about community standards. I hope you won't follow his example." She thrust a thick envelope at me. Here's a copy of our CC and Artiques, architectural guidelines, and a list of current violations that need immediate attention. I took the envelope. Violations. The unapproved greenhouse addition, the non-regulation mailbox, the excessive natural landscaping. We have standards about lawn maintenance. Oh, and the solar panels installed without committee approval. The fines are itemized on page 3. I felt my blood pressure rising but kept my tone even. I'll review everything and get back to you. See that you do. The next board meeting is Thursday evening at the community center. We expect all outstanding issues to be resolved by then. With that, she turned and walked back to her white Lexus SUV, her posture rigid as a ruler. I watched her drive away, then called my lawyer. Jason, what the hell is going on with this property? There's an HOA president on my doorstep demanding money. Ah, yes, Jason replied. That's one of the complications I mentioned. Your uncle's relationship with the HOA was contentious. I got that impression. The thing is, Graham, your uncle owned more than just his cabin. According to the property records, he actually owned the entire 800 acres that the Pine Ridge Estates is built on. I sat down heavily on the porch steps. What? Harlan sold parcels to the developer about 15 years ago for the homes, but he maintained ownership of the land underneath. He leased it to them on a 99-year land lease. It's all in the documentation I sent you. So I own the land under all those fancy houses. Yes, and the community center, the roads, everything. The homeowners own their structures, but you own the ground they're built on. I ran a hand through my hair. Does the HOA know this? Unlikely. Your uncle was strategic about the arrangement. The developer knew, of course, but they went bankrupt during the housing crash. The HOA formed afterward, and they may have never fully reviewed the original legal structure. I sat in silence, processing this information. Graham, are you still there? Yeah, I'm just thinking. About what? I looked down at the HOA covenant package in my hands, remembering Patricia's condescension. I'm thinking about what Uncle Harlan would do. That night, I dug through Uncle Harlan's files and found the land lease agreement. Sure enough, the developer had constructed the neighborhood on my uncle's land with a 99-year lease. The HOA had been collecting dues and enforcing rules on property they didn't fully own. According to my uncle's journal, which I found tucked in his desk drawer, he'd been in a constant battle with them over their increasingly restrictive rules. The journal's last entry, dated just weeks before his death, read, "They've pushed too far this time. No man should be told what color he can paint his own damn house or what flowers he can plant. I've got the nuclear option ready, just need to finalize the details with my lawyer." What was the nuclear option? I wondered. Whatever it was, Uncle Harlan hadn't had time to deploy it. The next morning, I drove into Whitefish to meet with a local real estate attorney. Margaret Holden was in her 60s with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "So you're Harlan's nephew," she said as I settled into her office. "He mentioned you. Said you had an engineer's mind but an artist's heart." I was touched that Uncle Harlan had spoken about me. "Did you know about his situation with the HOA?" Margaret rolled her eyes. "Oh yes, those people made his last years miserable. Patricia Winters is a tyrant with a clipboard. When they first formed after the developer went under, they seemed reasonable enough. But power corrupts, and homeowners association power corrupts absolutely." I laughed. "So what exactly are my rights here as the landowner?" Margaret leaned forward. "That's the fascinating part. Your uncle's lease with the original developer had some very specific conditions that the HOA has been violating for years. They've expanded their authority well beyond what the lease permits. Such as, for starters, They can't impose architectural controls on the original homestead, your uncle's cabin. They also can't restrict reasonable use of common areas, and they've been doing exactly that by limiting access to the lake and hiking trails to specific hours and requiring residents to pay for usage passes. I frowned. That doesn't seem right. It isn't. And there's more. The lease requires them to maintain all roads, utility easements, and common areas in good condition, which they haven't been doing outside of the immediate residential section. They've focused all maintenance on the areas where board members live. So they're in breach of the lease. Margaret smiled, and it reminded me of a wolf eyeing its dinner. Substantially. Your uncle was building a case. He hired me 3 months ago to prepare legal action, but his health declined before we could file. I thought about Patricia Winters and her clipboard, demanding money for violations on property that was rightfully mine. What would it take to continue what my uncle started? Margaret handed me a folder. This is what we prepared. It's a notice of multiple breaches of the land lease with a 60-day remedy period. If they fail to remedy all breaches, you have the right to terminate the lease or significantly modify its terms. I opened the folder, scanning the detailed legal document. And if I terminate the lease? Technically, all improvements on the land would revert to you as the landowner. That's standard in commercial land leases. But that would be extreme. We're talking about people's homes. Your uncle never intended to evict families. He just wanted the HOA to back off and respect property rights. I nodded. I don't want to make anyone homeless. I just want to stop the overreach. Margaret gave me an appraising look. You're like your uncle, reasonable but resolute. Here's what I suggest. Use the threat of lease termination to force the HOA to renegotiate its powers. Scale them back to what they should be handling: common area maintenance, reasonable aesthetic continuity, that sort of thing, not dictating every aspect of homeowners' lives. I like that approach. One more thing, Margaret said. The HOA board election is in 3 weeks. The current board has been running unopposed for years. If you wanted to really change things, you might consider getting involved. I left Margaret's office with a plan forming. Uncle Harlan hadn't just left me land, he'd left me a mission. That evening, I spent hours reading through the HOA documents and my uncle's journal. The rules were even more ridiculous than I'd initially thought. No vegetable gardens visible from the street. No clotheslines. No vehicles older than 5 years parked in driveways. Mandatory Christmas decorations during December, but they had to be approved styles and colors. I was making notes when there was another knock at the door. This time, it wasn't Patricia Winters but a man about my age holding a casserole dish. "Hi there," he said with a genuine smile. "I'm Derek Matthews from down the road. Thought you might like some dinner. Moving in can be hectic." I accepted the dish gratefully. "Thanks. I'm Graham Turner, Harlan's nephew. Nice to meet you." "Listen, I don't want to intrude, but I saw Patricia's car here yesterday and wanted to make sure you're okay. She can be intense," I laughed. "That's one way to put it. Want to come in?" Over Derek's excellent chicken casserole, I learned that he was a wildlife photographer who'd moved to Pine Ridge 3 years ago for the mountain views and proximity to Glacier National Park. He'd quickly run afoul of the HOA. "They fined me for having my camera equipment visible through my garage window," he said, shaking his head. "Called it unsightly storage. I'm a professional photographer. Those are my tools." That's absurd. It gets worse. Last summer, the Perez family put up a basketball hoop for their kids. The HOA made them take it down, claiming it lowered property values. And old Mr. Sullivan, he's a Vietnam vet, got fined for having an American flag that was 2 inches larger than the maximum allowed size. I leaned back in my chair. How do they get away with this? Derek sighed. Most people just pay the fines because fighting is too exhausting. The board has created this culture of fear. Cross them, and suddenly you're getting violation notices for things everyone else does. It's selective enforcement. And Patricia Winters is behind all this. She's the worst, but the whole board is bad. Her second in command, Karen Miller, is just as awful. They run this place like their personal fiefdom. The real problem is no one stands up to them anymore. Your uncle was the last one who really fought back. I nodded slowly. Well, that might be changing. Derek raised an eyebrow. Oh, I wasn't ready to reveal everything yet. Let's just say I'm not a fan of bullies. Before Derek left, he mentioned the community message board and suggested I join it to get a feel for neighborhood dynamics. What I found there that night was eye-opening. The digital message board was filled with complaints about the HOA, but always anonymously. Families fined for having the wrong shade of beige on their shutters. A widow penalized because her lawn was an inch too high while she was visiting her sister in the hospital. A family with a disabled child denied permission for a wheelchair ramp because it wasn't aesthetically consistent with neighborhood standards. Between these posts were Patricia's announcements, warnings about violations, reminders of rules, threats of liens against properties with unpaid fines. The tone was always condescending, treating homeowners like naughty children. It made my blood boil. These were people's homes, their sanctuaries, and they were living in fear of clipboard-wielding tyrants. I created an account and made my first post. Hello neighbors, I'm Graham Turner, Harlan Bennett's nephew and the new owner of his cabin. I'd like to meet more of you and learn about the community. Would anyone be interested in a casual get-together at my place this weekend? Bob, I'll provide snacks. I hit post and went to bed, wondering if anyone would respond or if fear of the HOA would keep them away. By morning, my post had 20 responses, all positive. It seemed like people were eager for community connection outside the HOA's watchful eye. I confirmed the gathering for Saturday afternoon and spent the next few days cleaning up the cabin and grounds. On Thursday evening, I decided to attend the HOA board meeting that Patricia had mentioned. The community center was a handsome stone building near the neighborhood entrance. Inside, about 30 residents sat in neat rows facing a long table where 5 board members sat like judges at a tribunal. Patricia Winters was center stage, of course, flanked by a thin woman with rigid posture who I assumed was Karen Miller. The other 3 board members, 2 older men and a younger woman, all had the look of people who enjoyed wielding petty power. I slipped into a seat in the back row as Patricia called the meeting to order. The first hour was excruciating, detailed discussions about the appropriate height of hedges, whether the community pool should allow inflatable toys, decision, no, and a heated debate about changing the approved exterior paint colors to include a slightly different shade of taupe. Then came the compliance report. Karen stood with a pointer and a slideshow of violations. She displayed photos of homes with minor infractions: a bicycle left on a front porch, wind chimes hanging from a tree, a door painted navy blue instead of the approved forest green. These violations have all received initial notices, Karen said primly. Second notices with fines will be issued next week if not corrected. A brave soul in the front row raised his hand. The Jenkins family had that bike on their porch because their garage door opener broke. They ordered a part, but it's back ordered. Patricia's smile was glacial. Rules are rules, Mr. Collins. If we make exceptions, where would it end? Chaos, that's where. The Jenkinses can store the bicycle inside their home until the repair is complete. Another resident spoke up. But their son uses that bike to get to his job at the grocery store. He leaves early in the morning. Perhaps he should consider more reliable transportation, Karen suggested. I'd heard enough. I stood up. Excuse me. All heads turned toward me. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Yes, Mr. Turner. I'm just curious about something. Does the board consider the impact on residents' quality of life when enforcing these rules? The room went silent. Patricia's voice was ice. The rules exist to maintain property values and community standards, which benefits everyone's quality of life. If you've reviewed the CC and articles I provided, you'd understand that. I have reviewed them, I said pleasantly. I'm just wondering about the balance between rigid enforcement and common sense. That bicycle, for instance. Would allowing it temporarily during a repair really lead to neighborhood chaos? Karen Miller stood up. Mr. Turner, you're new here. You don't yet understand how quickly standards can slip. Today it's a bicycle, tomorrow it's old cars on lawns and trash piling up. I smiled. That seems like quite a slippery slope argument. We don't have to explain our enforcement policies, Patricia cut in. The board's authority is clearly outlined in the HOA documents that all homeowners agree to when purchasing property here. I nodded. Of course, I'm still learning. Thank you for the clarification. I sat down, noting the surprised glances from other residents. Apparently, questioning the board was unusual. I stayed for the rest of the meeting, listening as they approved a special assessment for new landscaping around board members' homes while deferring maintenance on the playground equipment because it wasn't urgent. Afterward, several people approached me in the parking lot. That was brave, said a woman with gray streaked hair. I'm Helen Rodriguez. We haven't had anyone challenge them directly in meetings for over a year. Not since your uncle, added a man who introduced himself as Bill Jensen. He used to give them hell until they started targeting him with violations. Are you coming to the gathering at my place on Saturday? I asked. They exchanged glances. We'd like to, Helen said, but the board doesn't approve of unauthorized gatherings. They might retaliate. It's just neighbors getting to know each other, I said. There's nothing in the rules against that, is there? Bill laughed humorlessly. They find what they want in the rules. But you know what? I'll be there. I miss the way this neighborhood used to be before they took over. By Saturday, word had spread. The gathering at Harlan's nephew's place had become a minor act of rebellion. I was preparing snacks when Derek arrived early to help set up. You've caused quite a stir, he said, arranging chairs on the large back deck. Patricia's been asking questions about you. Has she now? She cornered me at the mailboxes yesterday. Wanted to know if you were planning to comply with community standards or be difficult like your uncle. I laughed. What did you tell her? That you seemed like a reasonable guy who was still settling in. But honestly, after seeing you at the meeting, I think you might be planning something. I handed him a beer. Let's just say I'm exploring my options. People began arriving around 4 o'clock, first in small, nervous groups, then more confidently as they saw others had come. By 5, my deck and yard were filled with about 40 residents. The mood was tentative at first, but as people relaxed with food and drinks, the conversation flowed more freely. I moved among them, listening more than talking. The stories were all variations on the same theme, a community that had once been friendly and collaborative, transformed by an increasingly authoritarian HOA into a place of suspicion and resentment. We used to have block parties and progressive dinners, said a woman named Olivia. Now, everyone's afraid to have more than 6 cars parked near their house because it might trigger a gathering violation. My kids can't even set up a lemonade stand, another parent complained. It's classified as unauthorized commercial activity. As the evening progressed, I found myself talking with a retired judge named Robert Simpson, who had moved to Pine Ridge 5 years ago. "The problem," he explained, "is that most people don't understand how HOAs actually work legally. The board has systematically expanded its powers beyond what's reasonable or even legal, but fighting them requires knowledge and resources that most homeowners don't have." "What would it take to change things?" I asked. "A coordinated effort, new board members, maybe legal action." He studied me over his glasses. "Your uncle was working on something before he passed. He never told me details, but he seemed confident he had a solution." I was about to respond when a murmur ran through the crowd. Patricia Winters and Karen Miller were striding up my driveway, faces set with determination. "Well," I said to Robert, "this should be interesting." Patricia marched straight up to me, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Turner, this gathering is in violation of Section 7.3 of the Community Guidelines regarding unauthorized events exceeding 20 persons." The party went silent. I smiled pleasantly. "Good evening, Patricia, Karen. Would either of you like a drink? We have beer, wine, soda." "This is not a social call," Karen snapped. "You are in violation and will be fined accordingly." I maintained my smile. "I've reviewed the CC and Articus thoroughly, and there's no prohibition against a homeowner having friends over. This is a casual gathering, not an event requiring authorization." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Section 7.3 clearly states—" "Section 7.3, I interrupted gently, "addresses organized community events using common facilities. My private property is not a common facility." Several people in the crowd murmured in agreement. Patricia's face flushed. "Your driveway is blocking emergency access." I gestured to the clear driveway. "As you can see, everyone has parked considerately on the side of the access road, which is permitted under Section 9.2 of your own parking regulations." Karen stepped forward. "The noise level is well within the limits specified in the noise ordinance, and it's only 6:30 p.m., well before quiet hours begin at 10 o'clock p.m., I finished for her. "Would you like to see the decibel reading app on my phone? I've been monitoring it." Patricia seemed momentarily speechless. I suspected no one had challenged her with such specific knowledge of the rules in quite some time. Robert, the retired judge, stepped to my side. "Patricia, the board has no grounds for enforcement action here. Mr. Turner is well within his rights as a homeowner." Patricia's eyes darted between us, then around at the watching crowd. Her authority was being publicly challenged, and she knew it. "This matter will be discussed at the next board meeting," she said stiffly. "And Mr. Turner, your outstanding violations still require immediate attention." I nodded respectfully. "I'll be addressing those through proper channels. Thank you for stopping by." After a moment of tense silence, Patricia and Karen turned and walked away, their postures rigid with indignation. Once they were gone, the party erupted in cheers and laughter. Several people clapped me on the back. "That was amazing," Derek said, grinning widely. "You out-rulebooked the rulebook tyrants." The mood of the gathering shifted dramatically. What had been a pleasant social event became something more purposeful. People were energized, sharing their stories more openly, discussing possibilities for change. Near the end of the evening, I stood on my deck steps and raised my voice to address the group. "Thank you all for coming tonight. It's been great getting to know you. I've heard a lot about how this community has changed, and not for the better. It seems to me that Pine Ridge has lost its way under the current leadership." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "The board election is in 3 weeks. I'm new here, but my uncle loved this place and cared about this community. I think it's time for new leadership and a return to common sense. so I'm announcing my candidacy for the HOA board. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Several people stepped forward on the spot to volunteer for my campaign. Robert pulled me aside after my announcement. "You've lit a fire here tonight, Graham, but be prepared, Patricia and her allies won't give up power easily. They've controlled this board for years and they play dirty." "I'm counting on it," I said quietly. The next morning, I wasn't surprised to find a violation notice taped to my door. My greenhouse was unauthorized, my natural landscaping was unkempt, and I was hosting illegal gatherings. The total fines came to $1,750. I took photos of the notice, then called Margaret Holden. It was time to move forward with Uncle Harlan's plan. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Word spread throughout Pine Ridge about my candidacy, and I wasn't running alone. 4 other homeowners stepped up to challenge the entire board: Helen Rodriguez, Bill Jensen, Derek Matthews, and a young mother named Gabriela Ortiz, whose request for a fence to keep her autistic son safe had been repeatedly denied on aesthetic grounds. We called ourselves the Common Sense Coalition, and our platform was simple: maintain reasonable standards without micromanagement, focus HOA funds on real maintenance needs rather than cosmetic preferences, and treat homeowners with respect. Patricia's reaction was swift and predictable. Suddenly, everyone associated with our campaign received violation notices. Derek's trash can was allegedly visible from the street. Helen's bird feeder was unauthorized wildlife encouragement. Bill's recently planted rose bushes were non-approved vegetation, but Patricia had miscalculated. Instead of intimidating people, the blatant retaliation galvanized the community. Homeowners who had been silent for years found their voices. Our campaign gatherings grew larger. People shared strategies for documenting the selective enforcement as evidence. Meanwhile, I was working with Margaret on the legal front. We prepared the formal notice of lease violations that Uncle Harlan had started, documenting years of HOA overreach and mismanagement. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records showing funds diverted to projects benefiting board members, minutes revealing rule changes made without proper notice, correspondence demonstrating retaliatory enforcement patterns. The morning before the election, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney threatening to place a lien on my property for unpaid fines and demanding I cease my defamatory campaign against the board. I forwarded it to Margaret with a simple message: "Time to drop the bomb." Her response came within minutes: "The documents are ready. Your call." That evening, we held our final campaign event at the community park, technically a common area open to all residents. When Patricia and Karen arrived with security guards to shut us down, I was ready. "Before you say anything," I said, stepping forward with a thick envelope, "I have something for you." I handed Patricia the legal notice. "This is a formal notification of multiple breaches of the land lease agreement between myself, as owner of the 800 acres comprising Pine Ridge Estates, and the HOA as the lessee of said property." Patricia's face went from red to white in seconds. "What are you talking about?" "The HOA owns the common areas." "No, Patricia, it doesn't. My Uncle Harlan Bennett owned all 800 acres of this land. He sold the houses to the developer but maintained ownership of the land itself through a 99-year lease agreement. I inherited everything, including that lease. And you've been in breach of its terms for years." The crowd had gone completely silent. Patricia thrust the envelope back at me. "This is absurd. Our attorneys would have." "Your attorneys never checked the county land records properly," Margaret said, stepping forward. "I'm Margaret Holden, Mr. Turner's attorney. The lease terms are quite clear. The HOA has 60 days to remedy all breaches, or Mr. Turner has the right to terminate the lease entirely. Karen found her voice. That's impossible. You can't just evict an entire neighborhood. I have no intention of evicting anyone, I said clearly, looking at the worried faces around me. Homeowners here purchase their homes in good faith. My dispute is with how the HOA has been operating, not with the residents. I turned back to Patricia. The lease requires the HOA to maintain all common areas, not just the ones near board members' homes. It prohibits arbitrary rule changes without homeowner input. It explicitly forbids retaliatory enforcement actions like the ones you've been taking against my supporters. This is a stunt, Patricia spat. A campaign tactic. I shrugged. The election is tomorrow. If you think this is just a tactic, feel free to ignore it, but I suggest you have your attorney review the county land records first. The election turnout the next day was unprecedented. Nearly 90% of homeowners cast ballots, compared to the usual 30%. The results were decisive. The Common Sense Coalition won every seat by a landslide. Patricia didn't attend the vote counting. According to the HOA secretary, she had spent the day with the association's attorney. I almost felt sorry for the lawyer who had to explain how they'd missed something so fundamental in their legal review. Our first board meeting was held the following week. The community center was packed as I took the president's seat, with my fellow new board members beside me. Thank you all for coming, I began. This is a new chapter for Pine Ridge Estates, and I want to start by being completely transparent about the legal situation. I explained the land lease agreement, showing documentation on the projector screen. Then I outlined our plan going forward. We're drafting a new lease agreement that will protect homeowners and establish reasonable limits on HOA powers. The new lease will include provisions that prevent any future board from returning to the kind of overreach we've experienced. Most importantly, it will restore the balance between maintaining standards and respecting homeowners' rights to enjoy their properties. The questions came quickly. What happens to all the fines we've paid? Can we finally paint our doors the colors we want? Will my basketball hoop be allowed now? We addressed each concern, promising a comprehensive review of all rules with community input. For the first time in years, the tension in the room gave way to hope and even excitement. After the meeting, as we were packing up, the former HOA secretary approached me with a thumb drive. "You should see this," she said quietly. Patricia knew I kept backup copies of everything. There are financial records here that don't match what was reported to homeowners. Significant discrepancies. The thumb drive contained what could only be described as a smoking gun. For years, Patricia and Karen had been diverting HOA funds to shell companies they controlled for landscaping services and administrative support. These companies charged premium rates but provided minimal services. They had embezzled nearly $200,000 over 5 years. With this evidence, we had no choice but to involve law enforcement. The county prosecutor was particularly interested when we explained how they had used the threat of property liens to silence anyone who questioned the financial discrepancies. 3 months after I inherited Uncle Harlan's property, Patricia Winters and Karen Miller were arrested on multiple charges of fraud, embezzlement, and financial elder abuse, as they had particularly targeted older residents with excessive fines and threats. The transformation of Pine Ridge Estates was remarkable. With reasonable rules in place, homeowners began personalizing their properties in ways that expressed their individuality while still maintaining an attractive community. Children played in front yards again. Gardens flourished. The basketball hoop went up. along with several others. We used recovered funds to repair the playground and expand the community garden. 6 months after the election, we held the first Pine Ridge Summer Festival on the large meadow behind my cabin. Hundreds of residents came together for food, music, games, and conversation. I watched from my porch as children raced across the grass and adults chatted in relaxed groups. Derek joined me, handing me a cold beer. "Look at this place now. It's like a completely different neighborhood." I nodded, taking in the scene. It's what it should have been all along. A community, not a prison camp with pretty houses. "Your uncle would be proud," he said. "This is exactly what he wanted." Later that evening, as the festival wound down and the sunset painted the mountains gold, I walked to the small grove of aspens where we had scattered Uncle Harlan's ashes the previous month. The white trunks glowed in the fading light, leaves whispering in the gentle breeze. "We did it, Uncle Harlan," I said quietly. "The nuclear option worked, but we didn't have to destroy anything to rebuild." I thought about how a quirk of inheritance, 800 acres of Montana wilderness, and a cantankerous uncle's foresight had changed not just my life, but the lives of hundreds of families. The land that Patricia Winters had tried to control through fear and intimidation was now truly serving its community. I had initially planned to stay only long enough to sort out the inheritance and set things right. My engineering job in Chicago was holding my position, but something had shifted in me during these months. The mountain air, the genuine connections with neighbors, the satisfaction of creating positive change, it all felt more meaningful than the life I'd left behind. As I walked back toward the festival grounds, where volunteers were packing up tables and children were catching the last fireflies of the evening, I knew I was home. Uncle Harlan hadn't just left me property, he'd left me a purpose and a place to belong. The legal case against Patricia and Karen proceeded through the courts. They eventually accepted a plea deal that included restitution, community service, and probation. Neither would serve as an HOA board member again, anywhere in the state, a condition I considered particularly fitting. With the stolen funds recovered and additional money saved by eliminating unnecessary landscaping standards, we were able to reduce HOA fees by 40% while still maintaining the truly important community amenities. The new lease agreement included an annual independent audit and required all significant expenditures to be approved by a majority of homeowners, not just the board. 1 year after inheriting Uncle Harlan's 800 acres, I officially resigned from my Chicago position and established a remote consulting engineering practice from my cabin, which I had renovated to include a proper home office. The greenhouse that had once been a violation now supplied vegetables for me and several elderly neighbors who could no longer garden themselves. At the anniversary of our board election, we held a community meeting that felt more like a celebration. Looking out at the faces of my neighbors relaxed, engaged, and genuinely happy to be there, I thought about how different this was from the tense, fearful gatherings of the past. "A year ago," I told them, "this community was divided by rules that served power rather than people. Today, we've proven that standards and freedom can coexist, that property values come from creating places people love, not places people fear. And most importantly, that neighbors looking out for each other is the true foundation of any community." As we closed the meeting and people lingered to chat, Helen Rodriguez approached me with a small package. "We found this when cleaning out the old HOA records," she said. "It was in a file marked Bennett Do Not Open." Inside was a hand-carved wooden sign that read, "Pine Ridge Estates, where common sense lives." On the back, in Uncle Harlan's distinctive handwriting, "For when the time is right." I smiled, running my fingers over the carved letters. The time was right indeed. The next day, we installed the sign at the entrance to Pine Ridge Estates, replacing the stern rule-filled board that had greeted visitors for years. It seemed like the perfect symbol of our transformation from a community bound by fear to one united by respect. Uncle Harlan's 800 acres had become something he would have loved, a place where people could truly call their houses homes and their neighbors friends. The HOA still existed, but now it served the community instead of controlling it. And I had found a purpose I never expected when that phone call came on a rainy Tuesday in April. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't the land itself, but what you choose to build upon it.